Hello, welcome to another video on our channel. Here, we translate testimonies from people who have had near-death experiences and other spiritual experiences. Today, let's learn the story of Everett Langston. He says he died, met Jesus, and received the revelation that Jesus is not as the church traditionally describes him. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Leave a comment with your name and city. Let us now hear Everett's testimony. My name is Everett Langston, and I have a story to tell that has completely changed my life and my worldview. First of all, let me tell you a little about who I was before this extraordinary event. I've always been an ordinary man, the kind you probably wouldn't notice in a crowd. I was born and raised in the northwestern United States, more specifically in Spokane, Washington. It's a quiet city, perfect for someone like me, who has always preferred the predictability and calm of a routine life. For many years, I worked as a supervisor in the probation department of a juvenile court. It was challenging work, but I liked the idea of being able to make a difference in the lives of these young people. My wife, Grace, and I lived a simple life. We had our home, our friends, our church. Yes, the church. Faith has always been an important part of my life. I grew up in a traditional Christian family and carried these teachings with me throughout my adult life. Our days followed a well-established routine. We woke up early, had breakfast together, went to work, came home, had dinner, watched a little TV, and went to sleep. On Sundays, it was the day to go to church. It was a comfortable life, without any major shocks or surprises. And to be honest, that's exactly how I liked it. I've never been one to question things much. I accepted what I was taught at church, followed society's rules, and did my job to the best of my ability. He was not given to great philosophical reflections or existential questions. Life was what it was, and I was satisfied with that. But all that changed in May 2006. It was a day like any other, at least at first. The sun was shining outside, the birds were singing, and I was getting ready for another day of work. I had no idea that, in just a few hours, my life would turn around completely. That I would go through an experience that would challenge everything I believed I knew about life, death, and what comes after. What happened that day in May caused me to question every aspect of my existence. It changed my perspective on the world, on my faith, on my purpose in life, and that's the story I want to share with you now. A story of death and rebirth, of revelation and transformation. A journey that took me beyond the limits of what I believed was possible and brought me back with a new understanding of what it truly means to be alive. Brace yourself, because what I'm about to tell you may challenge your own beliefs and perceptions, but I ask that you keep an open mind. Because, believe me, reality is much vaster and more wonderful than we can imagine. It all started with pain. A sharp, searing pain that struck me like lightning on the left side of my body. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a temporary discomfort. After all, I had faced kidney stones before, and I imagined it could be something similar. But as the minutes passed, the pain only increased, becoming almost unbearable. Grace, my wife, knew something was wrong as soon as she saw me. She knows me too well to be fooled by my attempt to hide my discomfort. "Everett," she said, "I think we'd better go to the hospital." I was a little reluctant, as I always do in these cases, but I ended up agreeing. The pain was getting really intolerable. The ride to the hospital seemed like an eternity. Every bump of the car sent waves of pain through my body. I clung to the seat, my knuckles white with strength, trying to breathe through the pain like I had learned last time. Grace drove as fast as she could, casting worried glances my way every few seconds. Arriving at the emergency room, I was quickly attended to. The doctors asked questions, examined me, and soon came to the conclusion I was already expecting. Another kidney stone. Despite my familiarity with the situation, I couldn't help but feel butterflies in my stomach when they informed me that surgery would be necessary to remove the stone. I was taken to a prep room, where nurses began preparing me for the procedure. I remember looking at Grace, who was holding my hand tightly, her eyes full of concern but also love and support. "It's going to be okay," she said, trying to smile. I nodded, trying to convey a confidence I didn't fully feel. As the anesthesia began to take effect, I felt a strange sense of premonition. It was as if a part of me knew something extraordinary was about to happen. I tried to push that thought aside, attributing it to natural nervousness before surgery. But the feeling persisted, a tingling at the base of my spine that had nothing to do with the medication. The last things I remember before losing consciousness were the bright lights from the operating room ceiling, the muffled sound of the doctors and nurses' voices, and Grace's face disappearing behind the closing doors. Then, darkness. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to embark on the most incredible, life-changing journey of my life. A journey that would take me beyond the limits of what I believed possible, that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. What happened next is something that even today, years later, I have trouble putting into words. But I'm going to try, because I believe it's a story that needs to be told, a story that can change the way we see the world and our place in it. The surgery itself went well, at least that's what I was told afterwards. The stone was successfully removed, and under normal circumstances I should have woken up a few hours later feeling sore, but relieved. However, fate had other plans for me. In the hours following surgery, while I was still unconscious, my body began to fight a silent, deadly battle. The antibiotic that was supposed to prevent infections did not work as expected. An infection began to spread rapidly through my system, turning what should have been a routine procedure into a fight for my life. I wasn't conscious of any of this, of course. I was lost in a deep anesthesia-induced sleep. But Grace, who was next to me, saw it all happen. She told me later how my skin became pale and clammy, how my breathing became irregular and shallow. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room with increasing frequency, their faces tense and worried. It was Grace who first noticed that something was terribly wrong. She said she suddenly felt as if a shadow had fallen across the room. He called a nurse, who immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. Within minutes, the room was filled with doctors and equipment, all working frantically to stabilize me. But the infection had already spread too much. My body was in septic shock, a serious condition where infection leads to a dangerous drop in blood pressure. My organs began to fail one by one, unable to receive the blood and oxygen they needed to function. Grace told me later, with tears in her eyes, what it was like to hear the sound of the heart monitor change from a constant beeping sound to a continuous high-pitched tone. My heart had stopped. I was clinically dead. Doctors immediately began resuscitation maneuvers, chest compressions, electric shocks, adrenaline injections. They used every resource at their disposal to try to bring me back. Grace watched all of this in a state of shock and disbelief. How could something so routine have gone so wrong? While all this was happening around me, I was not aware of anything. Or at least, I wasn't aware of my physical body or the drama unfolding in the hospital room. Because at that moment, I was embarking on a journey that would challenge everything I believed I knew about life and death. It was at 3:15 in the afternoon that I was declared clinically dead. This moment, which should have been the end of my story, was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Something that would forever change my understanding of reality and my place in it. What happened next is something I still have difficulty describing adequately to this day. Words seem inadequate to capture the magnitude and depth of the experience, but I will do my best to share with you what I experienced in the moments following my clinical death. Brace yourself, because what I'm about to tell you may challenge everything you think you know about the afterlife. The moment I was declared clinically dead marked the beginning of an experience that transcends any earthly description. Suddenly, without warning or transition, I found myself floating above my own body. It was a surreal feeling, like I was watching a scene from a movie, except the body on the bed was unmistakably mine. I saw the doctors and nurses working frantically, their voices muffled as if they were coming from far away. I watched Grace, my beloved wife, her face contorted with anguish, holding my limp hand. I wanted to comfort her, tell her that everything was okay, but I discovered that I had no voice, no physical body to touch hers. The strangest thing of all was that, despite the dramatic scene unfolding below me, I felt no fear. On the contrary, I was overcome by a feeling of deep and complete peace, something I had never experienced before. It was as if all the worries, fears, and anxieties I carried in life had simply dissolved. Then, without warning, I started moving. It was not a physical movement as we know it, but a kind of instantaneous displacement. I passed through the hospital ceiling as if it didn't exist, watched the other floors pass me by in a blur, and suddenly I was out, hovering over the city. The speed increased. I watched the familiar landscape of Spokane disappear beneath me, the mountains and forests of the northwestern United States turning into a carpet of green that grew smaller and smaller. The blue sky gave way to the deep black of space, dotted with stars of a clarity I've never seen from Earth. And then, in front of me, I noticed a light. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was bright but not dazzling, warm and welcoming. It seemed to call me. I felt irresistibly drawn to it, as if it were the place I always should have gone. As I got closer to the light, I started to hear sounds. They weren't exactly songs, but heavenly harmonies that seemed to vibrate through my being. It was as if the universe itself was singing a welcome song. Then, in the blink of an eye, I passed through the light. It was like walking through a curtain of pure energy. On the other side, I found myself in a place of indescribable beauty. The colors were more vivid than anything I had ever seen on Earth, with shades I didn't even know existed. The landscape was breathtaking, if I still needed to breathe. There were lush green fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, interspersed with forests of majestic trees whose leaves seemed to sparkle with their own light. Rivers of crystal clear water snaked through the landscape, their waters so clear they seemed to be made of liquid diamonds. The air, if I can call it that, was filled with a sweet, comforting scent, a mix of fresh flowers and something else, something I can't describe but that made me feel instantly at home. And the most incredible thing of all, I could feel the presence of unconditional and absolute love permeating that entire place. It was as if the environment itself was alive and conscious, embracing and welcoming me. At that moment, I knew, with a certainty that went beyond any doubt, that I had reached heaven. Not the heaven of books or paintings, not the heaven I imagined in my prayers, but a real heaven, alive and infinitely more wonderful than anything I could have dreamed of. And my journey was just beginning. As I took in the celestial landscape around me, I noticed something extraordinary. Everything seemed to be alive and conscious. The trees were not just trees, but sentient beings that radiated welcome. The flowers turned towards me, as if they were greeting me. Even the ground beneath my feet, if I still had feet in that state, seemed to pulse with life and energy. I began to walk, or rather float through this paradise. Each step revealed new wonders. I saw waterfalls of light that flowed upward instead of downward, their glowing waters emitting heavenly music as they touched the rocks. Fields of flowers with petals that changed color as I passed, creating a living kaleidoscope of colors I didn't even know existed. In the sky above, I saw what appeared to be constellations, but they moved and danced, forming complex patterns that seemed to tell cosmic stories. Occasionally, what I can only describe as comets of love crossed the firmament, leaving trails of golden light that made my being vibrate with indescribable joy. As I explored, I realized I could move with just thought. If I wanted to be on top of a distant mountain, in the blink of an eye, there I was. If I wanted to dive into the depths of an ocean of light, all it took was a wish and I was there, surrounded by luminous creatures that I had never seen on Earth. Most surprising of all was the sense of connection I felt with everything around me. There was no separation between me and the environment. It was as if every atom of my being was in perfect harmony with every atom of that heavenly place. I could feel the love and joy emanating from everything, and I knew that love and joy emanated from me too. At one point, I stopped at the edge of a crystal clear lake. The waters were impossibly clear, reflecting not only the sky above, but appearing to contain entire galaxies in their depths. As I looked at my reflection, I was shocked. It wasn't the 53-year-old Everett with gray hair and worry lines looking back at me. Instead, I saw a radiant version of myself, young and vibrant, but also wise and serene. I realized that I was seeing my true essence, free from the limitations of the physical body and linear time. As I gazed at my reflection, I felt a presence approaching. It was not a physical approach in the sense that we understand it on Earth, but an intensification of the feeling of love and welcome that permeated that entire place. I turned around, or rather, my consciousness turned, and it was then that I saw him for the first time on this heavenly journey, Jesus. Its appearance wasn't exactly like the paintings and statues I knew from Earth. He was pure light, love incarnate. You have a lot to see and learn. At that moment, I knew that my journey through heaven was just beginning, and that the most profound revelations were yet to come. As I walked through that heavenly paradise, marveling at every detail, I felt a presence approaching. It was a feeling unlike anything I had ever experienced, a mix of awe, unconditional love, and inexplicable familiarity. Instinctively, I knew who I was about to meet. The trees in front of me seemed to open up, forming a natural path. And there he was, Jesus Christ. But he was not the Jesus of Renaissance paintings or stained glass windows in churches. It was a radiant figure, emanating a soft, warm light that seemed to embrace everything around it. His eyes were endless pools of compassion and understanding. When he looked at me, I felt like my entire life was being seen and understood in an instant. There was no judgment, just total acceptance and pure love. I fell to my knees, not out of fear or forced reverence, but because the emotion was simply overwhelming. Tears, if you can call it that in that state, streamed down my face. It was as if all the weight of my sins, doubts, and earthly fears were being washed away, leaving only a feeling of lightness and purity that I had never experienced before. Jesus approached me. "You've had a long journey to get here." I was speechless. How to respond to God's own Son? But I realized I didn't need to talk. In that place, communication went beyond words. Our thoughts, emotions, and memories flowed freely between us. Jesus began walking, gesturing for me to follow him. As we walked side by side, he began to speak. His voice was like music, full of wisdom and understanding. "Everett," he said, "I know you have many questions about life, about faith, about the purpose of it all. And I know that much of what you see here challenges what you thought you knew." I nodded, unable to put into words the confusion and amazement I felt. Jesus continued, "The truth, Everett, is far simpler and yet deeper than many on earth believe. Love, unconditional, universal love, is the essence of everything. It is the fabric that binds all creation together." As he spoke, I felt as if veils were being removed from my eyes. Deep understandings about the nature of reality, about the purpose of life, about the interconnectedness of all things, flowed into me. "Many of the teachings you received on earth," Jesus explained, "are human interpretations, sometimes distorted by limitations of understanding or by personal agendas. The essence of my message has always been about love, compassion, and unity, not about judgment, separation, or fear." These words hit me deeply. How many times had I judged others based on narrow interpretations of Scripture? How many times had I allowed fear, rather than love, to guide my actions? Jesus, noticing my thoughts, placed his hand on my shoulder. "Don't blame yourself, Everett. Each journey is unique, and each soul learns and grows in its own time. The important thing is that you are here now, seeing and experiencing the truth for yourself." At that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense that I thought my being would explode. Gratitude for this experience and for this revelation, for this unconditional love that I now understood to be the true nature of the universe. Jesus smiled, a smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom and love of the cosmos. You have so much more to see and learn, Everett. Are you ready to continue our journey? Without hesitation, I said yes. Little did I know that the deepest revelations were yet to come. As we walked side by side, Jesus began to reveal truths to me that challenged everything I thought I knew about reality, faith, and the purpose of existence. His voice was soft, but each word carried the weight of universal truth. Everett, he began, much of what you and others on earth believe about me, about heaven, and about the nature of spiritual reality is a simplification. The truth is far vaster and more wonderful than the human mind can fully comprehend. He paused, allowing me to absorb his words. Then he continued. The image that many have of me as a harsh judge, ready to condemn, is far from the truth. My essence, the essence of all that is divine, is unconditional love. Not the kind of conditional love that often experience on earth, but a love that accepts, embraces, and nurtures all souls, regardless of their actions or beliefs. These words hit me deeply. How many times had I feared divine judgment? How many times had I judged others, believing I was doing God's will? Jesus, noticing my thoughts, smiled gently. The judgment you fear on earth is actually an illusion. Each soul, upon leaving the physical plane, goes through a process of self-reflection. They create rules, rituals, and hierarchies that, instead of bringing people closer to the divine, often push them further away of true spirituality. I felt a mixture of shock and liberation upon hearing those words. All my life, I had faithfully followed the teachings of my church. It is in recognizing the divinity in oneself and in all beings. It is in understand that we are all interconnected parts of a universal consciousness. As he spoke, I felt as if veils were being removed from my spiritual eyes. I began to see reality in a whole new way. I saw how everything, every person, every creature, every particle in the universe was connected by threads of light and love. I saw how our actions and thoughts created ripples in this cosmic web, affecting everything around us. The purpose of life, Jesus continued. I was not to earn a place in heaven or avoid punishment. The purpose is to grow, to learn, to expand consciousness, every life, every experience. There was no fear or resistance. There was just a deep feeling that finally I was getting closer to the truth. Jesus, sensing my state of mind, placed his hand on my shoulder. His touch radiated love and understanding. I know it's a lot to take in, Everett. But remember, you are not here by chance. Your journey on earth, your experiences, your struggles, and your moments of joy, they have all prepared you for this moment of revelation. I looked into the eyes of Jesus, those eyes that seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe, and I asked the question that was burning in my heart. What should I do with all this when I return? His smile was gentle, but his eyes sparkled with an intensity that touched me deeply. Share the love, Everett. Live the truth you have experienced here. Do not preach dogma or doctrine. And this journey of discovery and revelation was just beginning. After the profound revelations shared by Jesus, he invited me to explore more of the heavenly kingdom. There is so much more to see and experience, he said with a warm smile. Each soul perceives this place in a unique way, shaped by their own experiences and understandings. Allow yourself to take it all in without judgment or expectations. With these words, Jesus gently disappeared, not in an abrupt or frightening way, but as if he had merged with the environment around us. I realized that even without his physical presence, I could still feel his essence in everything around me. I then began my exploration of this incredible celestial realm. The first thing I noticed was how the environment seemed to respond to my thoughts and emotions. When I thought of peace and tranquility, I instantly found myself in a beautiful, serene garden with vibrantly colored flowers that I had never seen on Earth. The aroma of these flowers was indescribable, a mixture of fragrances that calmed and invigorated at the same time. When thinking about grandeur and majesty, the scenario changed. Now I was on top of a magnificent mountain, looking down on a valley that stretched endlessly. The mountain seemed to move gently, like waves in a cosmic ocean. The sky above was a kaleidoscope of ever-changing colors, with auroras dancing in complex, calm, mesmerizing patterns. At one point, I felt a deep connection with the nature around me. The trees, the rocks, even the air seemed alive and conscious. I realized that I could communicate with them not through words, but through a direct exchange of feelings and impressions. It was as if the entire environment was an extension of my own being, and I was an extension of it. As I wandered this wonderful realm, I encountered other souls. Some I recognized immediately. They were loved ones who had gone before me. My grandparents were there, looking young and radiant, their faces lit up with welcoming smiles. I also saw friends I had lost over the years, all looking like the best version of themselves. The reunion with them was moving beyond words. There was no need for explanations or catching up on the conversation. In an instant, we share everything, our experiences, our feelings, our individual journeys. It was a perfect and instantaneous communication, free from the limitations of earthly language. One of the souls I met was my Uncle Robert, who has always been an inspiring figure to me on Earth. He smiled and wordlessly delivered a message to me. Remember to take care of your family, Everett. The love we share here should be reflected in our actions on Earth. In addition to the souls I knew, I encountered beings that seemed to transcend any human description. They were like beings of pure light, radiating wisdom and compassion. Although I could not fully understand their nature, I felt that they were guardians or guides of this heavenly realm. One of these beings approached me and, through a communication that went beyond words, showed me visions of the universe. I saw galaxies being born and dying, the cosmic dance of stars and planets, the interconnectedness of all things, from the smallest atom to the vastest supernova. It was a lesson in humility and, at the same time, a revelation of the greatness of creation. Throughout this exploration, time seemed to not exist as we know it on Earth. There was no day or night, just an eternal present full of discoveries and wonders. Every moment was filled with a joy and peace that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. However, in the midst of all this beauty and peace, I felt a slight uneasiness grow within me. A part of me knew that this heavenly journey wasn't permanent yet, that there was something more I needed to do. It was then that I felt the presence of Jesus approaching again, and I knew it was time for another important revelation. As I took in the wonders of the heavenly realm, feeling more at home than I had ever felt on Earth, the presence of Jesus materialized again at my side. His face was serene, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made me realize something important was about to happen. "Everett," he said softly, "you have experienced just a glimpse of eternity, but your journey on Earth is not yet complete." I felt my heart, or whatever the essence of my being was in that state, sink at those words. The thought of leaving this place of perfect peace and unconditional love caused me a deep sadness that I had never experienced before. Jesus, sensing my distress, gently placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch was like a wave of understanding and comfort that coursed through my entire being. "I understand your reluctance, Everett," he said, his voice full of compassion. "This place is indeed wonderful, and one day you will return to stay. But now, you have an important mission to fulfill on Earth." I looked at him, confused and a little apprehensive. "A mission?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Jesus nodded, his smile radiant as the sunrise. "Yes, Everett, you have experienced something extraordinary here. You have seen truths that many on Earth still do not understand. You have felt the unconditional love that is the essence of all creation. Now your task is to bring some of that light back to the physical world." As he spoke, I began to feel a sense of purpose growing within me. It was as if every fiber of my being was aligning with a new direction, a new understanding of my role in the grand scheme of things. But how? I asked, feeling both honored and frightened by the responsibility. How can I share something so vast, so incredible, with people who haven't experienced it? Jesus smiled again, his eyes shining with infinite wisdom. Through love, Everett, through compassion, through your actions and your being, you do not need to preach or convert. Simply live the truths you have experienced here. Show people, by your example, the power of unconditional love and of the unity of all creation. As I absorbed his words, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. I realized that it wasn't about convincing people about the existence of heaven or about theological details. It was about living in a way that reflected the deepest truth I had experienced, that we are all one, all connected by divine love. Remember, Everett, Jesus continued, every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, every expression of true love is a window into this heavenly kingdom. Through your actions, you can bring a little bit of heaven to earth. At that moment, I felt a determination rise within me. Yes, I would miss this place of perfect peace and love. But now I had a purpose, a mission that gave new meaning to my earthly existence. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my own voice. Jesus smiled, a smile that contained all the love in the universe. I know you are, Everett. And remember, even when you return, you will never truly be apart from this place or me. We will always be with you, in every beat of your heart, in every breath, in every act of love. With these words, Jesus extended his hand. When I touched it, I felt a wave of energy run through my being. The celestial world around me began to fade, colors blending into a swirl of light. The last thing I heard before I felt myself being pulled back was the voice of Jesus, echoing across the dimensions. Go with love, Everett. Go with peace. And always remember what you experienced here. And then, in the blink of an eye, the sky disappeared. I felt myself falling back into the world I had left behind. But now, I was returning transformed, with a new purpose and a new understanding of the true nature of reality. The transition back to my physical body was abrupt and disorienting. One moment I was in the heavenly realm, enveloped in pure light and love, and the next, I was back in my aching, fragile body in the hospital bed. The first thing I felt was pain, a sharp, pulsing pain that seemed to permeate every cell in my body. Then came the sound, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the muffled murmur of voices around me. Slowly, with an effort that seemed monumental, I opened my eyes. The fluorescent light of the hospital room was blinding and harsh compared to the soft, welcoming light of the sky. I blinked several times, trying to focus my vision. Little by little, the shapes around me began to become clear. I saw the face of Grace, my wife, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but now shining with relief and disbelief. "Everett?" she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "Oh, God, Everett, you're back." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. A nurse quickly approached, offering me a glass of water with a straw. The simple act of drinking was difficult and painful, but also incredibly comforting. In the days that followed, I was informed about what had happened. I had been clinically dead for almost 20 minutes. The doctors were about to officially declare my death when, inexplicably, my heart started beating again. They called it a medical miracle. I knew it was much more than that. Physical recovery was slow and challenging. My body had experienced immense trauma, and it would take time to fully heal. But the most profound transformation was happening internally. From the moment I returned, I knew nothing would be the same. My experience in heaven had fundamentally changed my perception of reality. More serene. I smiled, feeling a surge of love for her. "I've seen things, Grace. I replied softly. Things that changed everything. Little by little, I began to share my experience with Grace and others. At first, it was difficult to find the right words. The love and compassion that I now carried in every fiber of my being. My approach to life has changed dramatically. Things that once seemed crucially important, status, material possessions, trivial concerns, now seemed insignificant. Instead, I found myself focusing on what really mattered: love, compassion, connection. At work, my colleagues noticed the difference. Where before I might have been harsh or critical of young offenders, I now approached them with a deeper understanding and compassion. I could see beyond their mistakes to the divine light that existed within each of them. My relationship with religion has also changed. Although he still attended church, it was no longer out of a sense of obligation or fear of divine judgment. Now I saw church as an opportunity for fellowship, to share the love I had experienced in heaven. At times I found it difficult to reconcile some of the church's teachings with what I had experienced, but I learned to focus on the essence of the message of love and compassion. I began meditating regularly, seeking to reconnect with that sense of unity and unconditional love that I had experienced in heaven. Sometimes, in moments of deep silence, I could almost feel the presence of Jesus beside me, his love wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. As the months passed, I realized that I was fulfilling the mission Jesus had given me, not through grand gestures or preaching, but through small acts of kindness and love. A smile for a stranger, a kind word for someone in trouble, a loving hug for Grace. Each of these actions was a way to bring a little bit of heaven to earth. Of course, not everything was easy. There were days when earthly reality felt heavy and oppressive, days when I longed for the perfect peace I had experienced in heaven. But in those moments, I remembered Jesus' words, "You will never truly be separated from this place or me." And so, day after day, I continue my journey, transformed by my near-death experience, but still very human, carrying the light of heaven with me, sharing it through love and compassion, living each day with the awareness that we are all one, all part of something much bigger and more wonderful than we can imagine. My story may seem incredible to some, hard to believe to others, but for me, it's the deepest truth I've ever known. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love, pure, unconditional, universal love, is the most powerful force in the universe. It is what connects us, what sustains us, what takes us home. And so, I conclude my story, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has had a glimpse of something beyond our earthly understanding. My hope is that by sharing my experience, I can inspire others to live with more love, more compassion, more awareness of our fundamental unity. Because, in the end, that is what our journey here on earth is all about. Learning to love, truly and unconditionally, as we are loved by the divine. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch every new video and help us spread this message to a wider audience. See you next time.